herd immunity basically says that the larger the percentage of the population that is immune against the disease, the greater the protection, because you have less susceptible hosts for that virus or bacteria, whatever it is, to spread in the population. By reaching a high percentage of the population that is immune, you not only slow down the spread of the virus to those who are unvaccinated, but you also protect not just people who didn't want to get the vaccine, but those people who can't get the vaccine. You know, I hear people talking about flu vaccination and COVID vaccination simultaneously, and that's up to the manufacturers and the FDA to decide. But at this point, because it's so much more infectious, we need to protect ourselves, and vaccines are the best way to do it.
Get ready for your unofficial dental hygiene podcast. These are the tales of two hygienists, one East Coast RDH and one West Coast hygienist. Listen as they tackle the profession of dental hygiene with humor and enthusiasm. Now, please join Michelle Strange and Andrew Johnston as they tell you a tale of two hygienists.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Tale of Two Hygienists, episode number 299. My name is Andrew.
And this is Michelle. Holy crap, 299.
Yeah.
You know, I got to tell you, I got a little anxiety about like an intro for 299 episodes. Like, are we even interesting anymore?
No, we haven't been for a long time. And I think that, I mean, this is our thing, though.
People like when we argue.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't love a good little like argument? Speaking of which, though, by the way, before we get into too much, I have to kind of give you guys an update and Michelle, I'm sorry I didn't tell you this before our podcast episode recording.
Fun.
Do you remember last week we talked about how I'm beefing with Smartless podcast?
The non-existent drama?
Well,
yeah, got it.
I mean, it was non-existent. So what happened was I heard back from Will Arnett, and he said, look, if you want to throw down, come on over and we'll throw down. So we're going to schedule a pay-per-view fight, I think, me and him.
Let me just also go ahead and throw out there that between the three of them, we would never survive. Like, Will Arnett's beefy. He'd kill us.
Absolutely.
Scott Hayes is hilarious. Like, we could never meet.
Sean Hayes?
Oh, yeah, Sean Hayes. See, look, he would eat me alive because I couldn't even get his name right.
Verbally, he would probably eat us alive. I think I could probably take him, though, physically.
No, I'm saying physically, Will Arnett's kicking our ass. We could never match his humor. And what's his other face? Bateman. I mean, the wit on that man. Yeah. Like, we could never compete.
So basically in every facet of life, between the three of them and the two of us.
Between the three of them, we're screwed. Yeah. Let's just get right with that. Marinate in it.
Okay. Look,
cry, and then move on.
Probably. But one thing that we have going for our podcast that they don't do on theirs, or that they do on theirs, we don't eat on our show. How annoying is it that they're always eating into the microphone? Just saying.
We don't eat anymore. I'm pretty sure I've done that once or twice. But do we also remember Gumgate, where I was like chastised on a Facebook Live for chewing gum? And look at Andrew. See, okay, this was years ago that this happened. And if that isn't just the quintessential example of the mean girl crap in dentistry.
I've chewed gum in almost every single one of our videos.
Every single one of them.
Every podcast.
No one ever says anything. Nothing.
To be fair, I'm pretty discreet about it. Like, no one really knows that it's there. Sometimes it's kind of tucked up in like my cheek or whatever. But still, like, it's so ridiculous. Like
It was so ridiculous. It was, I mean, the comments, like, didn't your mom ever teach you not to, like, chew with your mouth open? I was like, didn't your mom teach you not to say anything if you don't have anything nice to say? Like, what the hell? It was ridiculous. I mean, the women came for me. And I never have gum in my mouth. Like, well, and the reason I was kind of doing my open mouth chewing is because I am a chronic mouth breather, and I'm trying to work on this journey of having better nasal breathing. And instead of being like, oh, is there an issue? Like, what's going on? Why do you have to have your mouth open sometimes to chew?
Yeah.
And they were like, you're the worst human ever for having gum in your mouth.
I mean, that's not the reason why they're the worst human ever, but like that's still true.
I mean, I got a whole other list of things.
Come on, guys, dig deeper. There's a lot there.
The chewing gum is barely scratching the surface for the trash human that I am. I mean, seriously. But
can I say, sorry, I know I'm just like railroading you on this intro here. I also want to say though,
like a normal white man. Continue. What?
oh my gosh, I have been so good for 300 episodes. And that's not my personality. Anyways, I'm really excited though. Like, so we had a call last night with Spring Hatfield and we're talking about like the future, like content of 2022. And I am so freaking excited still for next year. And not that this year is going to be like garbage, guys. Like, keep tuning in. Like, we're still going to bring it.
I was going to say, really chewing up the last part of that year.
But I'm just really excited. Like, there's going to be some really good changes. Not even improvements. I mean, I guess like it'll be just different. And, you're going to have that like actionable content, but then it's going to be like relatable. And buddy, I'm excited.
You know what's really fun is that there was a business call that I wasn't on and I'm just learning about it. That's real fun. Just like
just let
like
that sit
Andrew,
there.
The white man just controlling this podcast.
You contacted her first. You did all the initial stuff. I'm just like the little helper boy trying to like.
It's fine.
Make sure
You're
the content.
just a well-oiled machine that I don't even need to know what's happening in the company. It's fine. It's totally fine.
But I'm just the helper boy.
And I'm being the typical woman where I say it's fine and it is not fine.
Oh my gosh.
I don't.
This has been an aggressive intro. Everyone.
We have another interview after this, so it's going to be really fun.
Oh, okay. Well, on that note.
On that note, I'm in New Orleans now. So if you are a New Orleans hygienist or dental professional, like reach out. I want to hang out and do things. That'd be awesome. You all right there, buddy?
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to take a back seat. I'm just trying to shh, Andrew.
Shut up.
I mean, also I had nothing to contribute to your New Orleans thing. Although the place that you're staying in, that we talked about this library that you have behind you, that no one can see on this podcast, but it is awesome. I think that's the dream of what I want in my house.
Just ceiling to floor bookshelves filled with books. And yeah, I'm really excited. This Airbnb that I'm renting for the next few months, the owner travels the world because she studies, African culture. So all these books behind me are like just amazing things that I get to read all about, Black culture, African culture, slavery, racism, all the things that I get really, I chew those things up and I'm just learning more slowly. But this week, we are continuing on our journey during Infection Control Awareness Month, which is DICAM. OSAP has this month because we're all about creating safe dental visits and infection prevention, especially in the last 2 years, is just top of mind. And so I brought on Dr. John Molinari to talk about vaccinations and immunizations, and not because it's just a hot topic right now and a very contentious topic, but because immunizations have been very important for dental healthcare providers for decades upon decades, not just against respiratory viruses like coronavirus, but also bloodborne pathogens that we're all very familiar with. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode. I truly was honored to bring him on. You guys know, like in the infection control space, I fangirl so hard. So it was such a joy to be able to chat with Dr. Molinari and enjoy this episode, and check him out anytime he is in your area for a presentation.
Before we get to the interview, we want to say a big thank you to Paradise Dental Technologies, or PDT, for supporting the continuing education portion of this podcast for so many years. If you do not know already, many of our full-length episodes count for CE. You'll find the links in the show notes, or you can sign up for our newsletter by going to atale2hygienist.com. When you sign up for the newsletter, we will periodically send out links to shows that have expiring CE courses attached. And none of this could be possible without the support of the amazing people over at PDT. So check out their hygiene and other instruments at pdtdental.com. That's pdtdental.com. Now, on to the interview.
Well, listeners, I am really excited for our guest today. Actually, I have to tell a story. I have Dr. John Molinari here with us, and we're going to talk a lot about vaccinations and why that's so critical for the dental healthcare provider. But Dr. Molinari, so we were just talking, like I drove in and landed in my new home for the next few months here in New Orleans. And I was thinking about our episode and our interview and everything that we were doing. And I was like, I'm trying to remember, like, when was the first time that I met Dr. Molinari? And I know we've like interacted in the last, year or 2 years because of OSAP, but I originally went to one of your courses a solid decade ago. It has to be a solid decade ago. And I was trying to remember, and it was like all these memories came flooding back to me once I pinpointed it. And I was working in a surgical periodontal practice, and we had really exceptional infection control and prevention practices. I mean, very good ones. But there were a handful of things that we were not doing that we learned from you, and it changed the entire office from then on. So it was really great to go as a team, which is something that we all talk about. Take the team to these courses so you can really dial up and dial in your infection prevention protocols. And so I'm just excited that I get to have this one-on-one time with you, and welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Michelle, and you're very kind. 10 years ago sounds like a long time, but gosh, just see, I've been a microbiologist now. 51 years is when I started studying microbiology. So yeah, it's been around the block a few times. It's very nice of you to invite me, and hope this is useful.
So I do have a quick question about your journey. So you're a microbiologist. So what made you kind of turn into dentistry and kind of present to us and all of our infection prevention practices?
The graduate microbiology program I was at the University of Pittsburgh was in the health professions center, medical school, dental school, public health, etc. And I was physically located in the dental microbiology department. My advisor was the head of the department. And so I interacted in the medical center with other students and faculty within that group, but I was physically located in the dental micro. So while I was a graduate student, I was involved in teaching dental students, hygienist assistants, because my research wasn't all just dental. I was doing perio research, et cetera, but my own research. And after I got my degree, they offered me a job in the dental school. The microbiologist, other one, had left. And so I became a faculty member, and then I went to Detroit at University of Detroit Dental School for over 30 years, did dental research, yada, yada, worked in hospitals. But my beginnings as a faculty member were in the dental school, and so that's what I focused on. But I've been with the medical groups and have worked in hospitals over, as I said, over all these years as well. So the background is a combination of both medical and dental, which is nice because I can relate, or at least I try to relate to the broader groups.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay. I was always wondering why dentistry out of all the things. So we are going to chat today about kind of a hot topic, but a topic that has been around for many years and kind of been an important aspect of breaking the chain of infection, and that is vaccinations or immunizations. You ready to get into this hot topic?
Sure. What's up?
So let's talk about the successful impact of vaccines when we look historically over like the health of the population.
That is something that people have to realize and have to start when they start talking about some of the challenges of current vaccines and the effect of COVID on vaccines. That what people need to realize is that historically, vaccines were one of the greatest public health achievements of the 21st century. The CDC did analysis of all great public health achievements, and vaccines were right up there near the top because you look at all the previously common diseases, measles, mumps, polio, smallpox, chickenpox. Well, that vaccine came later, but the fact is that when you look at the incidence of those things through the 20th century, and then the success of vaccines and knocking them down to small fractions of what they were in the population, you see that the population has definitely benefited from all these vaccine preventable disease decreases. We've eliminated one. Smallpox is the only one that we've eliminated. That was like 1978, but we're very, very close to eliminating polio. We've come close a couple of times. There's still some pockets over in Asia, but when you look at the incidence of these diseases now in the United States and Canada, you see just how low they are. That's great news. It's also difficult for some people to comprehend because people don't know about those diseases. I don't know how old you are. You're much younger than I am, but you and people your age and younger never saw measles, mumps, chickenpox, certainly polio and smallpox. So what's happened is people don't think about those, and they focus sometimes on the rare adverse effects that a vaccine can lead to, and they think that that's what vaccines are all about. They don't realize just how far down we have knocked these diseases. For example, measles is still a major player in the world. World Health Organization is trying to vaccinate different areas of the world to reduce it even more. But I believe last year, the year before, partially because of COVID, where they couldn't get in, we had almost 200,000 deaths globally from measles. You don't think about that. And it's mostly in young children. So you look at where we are with the success of vaccines, and it's incredible that back in my day, when these vaccines came out, like the polio vaccine, it was a personal family responsibility, but also people looked at it as a public health responsibility to get vaccinated. You protect yourself, your family, but also others that you come in contact with. And that's what people need to think about.
Yeah, it is a very interesting time we are living in.
Yes, we are.
It is. So there's a lot of talk about like what properties a vaccine should have or what's in a vaccine. So I'm curious, what are the ideal vaccine properties and how are they thoroughly investigated before a vaccine is actually approved for public use?
That's a great question. And again, you have to go back to what the requirements are. First and foremost, vaccines have to be safe. You know, you're a health professional. The old health professional adage, do no harm, applies here. During every phase of vaccine development, and there are really 6 phases. The preclinical phases, which there are 3, and then the 3 clinical trials, which we all know about. They have to be evaluated not only for their efficacy, do they stimulate protective immunity in the vaccinated individuals, but are they safe? And a large part of all of this has to do with looking to see that you have no adverse effects, or that these adverse effects are so minimal that they don't overcome or override the benefits of vaccination. So with the laboratory studies, the first 3 phases, you look at not only animal studies and in vitro studies, but you look to see if animals have adverse reactions during vaccination studies. In the clinical trials, they look to see the adverse reactions. You remember, I believe it was the original, when Pfizer came out, there were some people that developed allergic reactions to the vaccine components, and that was a big thing. So they talked about people having allergies to components, getting the vaccine maybe in a medical setting, you know, a hospital, something like that, or a hospital clinic. But safety is huge. The benefits have to far outweigh the potential risks. Of course, it has to be antigenic. You want to stimulate an immune response. And again, that also takes a lot of work and to look to see just how these things develop. We would love to have something that gives lifelong immunity or long-term immunity. I don't think we're going to get that with COVID. I don't think we're going to get that with a lot of the respiratory viruses like that we see with influenza. These things change and mutate. So again, that's the requirement probably for boosters. But you want something that is going to be able to be administered to as wide a range of the population as possible, both immune competent and immune compromised individuals. That way we get that largest amount as possible of protection within the population so the virus doesn't have as many possible hosts to infect. All of these things are fundamentally important and have to be looked at for any vaccine. And there are many vaccines that the public doesn't hear about that never make it to the final stages. For example, many people don't realize that with COVID vaccines, I want to say there were 80 and 90 vaccines that have been developed or tested around the world. And there were a number of them that were stopped being studied because of adverse effects associated with them. You don't hear about that because it was probably in other countries, but those things happen and the standards don't really change very much. So we like to get as close to the ideal as possible, but as we'll continue talking, you'll see that no vaccine is 100% foolproof.
And why is that? Why is a vaccine not 100%?
Well, one thing to look at right away is not everybody responds to vaccines, to a vaccine. When Pfizer, Moderna came out with their data and said it was over 90 or 94, 95% effective, that still says that one in 20 people in the population about would not respond to the vaccine. Not everybody responds. I'll give you my own personal experience. I didn't respond to the hepatitis B vaccine when I first got it. I was one of the first ones to get it back in June of '82 when the vaccine came out. I had to get it. If I wanted to get it in our dental school in Detroit, I had to show that I received it. Well, I did. We got it in school about a year later, and I went and I got tested, and dang it, I didn't have any antibodies. I was negative. So I had to go through the whole series all over again. Back then, it was 3 more injections. So here I was pretty healthy, and yet I didn't respond to the vaccine. And you also know people who didn't respond to the hepatitis B vaccine. They had to go through the whole series or a single injection, whatever. So first of all, not everybody responds to vaccines. That would be great if they were 100%, but never happened. Your immune response is different than mine, even though we may both be immune competent. We recognize different things or don't recognize different things. The other thing is you may have a person who receives a vaccine, but they don't develop much in the way of an immune response. Relatively low levels of antibodies. Immunologic memory is not very strong. And so the protection doesn't last very long, which means that they may be susceptible to the infection again for much shorter than, say, you or some other person. That's important. The issue of different strains emerging and variants comes up. You just look at the example like influenza. Not everybody responds to the flu vaccine. It's a decent vaccine. It helps protect against a lot of hospitalizations and deaths, but it certainly isn't anywhere near what we see with other vaccines. And so as new strains of influenza come up, their antigens may be different than the previous year's strains, and the antibodies that you produced against last year's vaccine doesn't necessarily cross-react with this year's strains as effectively. And we're seeing that also with SARS-CoV-2. The emergence of different strains really does play a role as far as the effectiveness of vaccines. When people think they're vaccinated in general, okay, I'm done, I'm protected, I can go out and do whatever I want. And it's not true. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, I have not seen the CDC say that this is a very specific test you can get to check to see if you have protective antibodies. We know you can stimulate antibody production, and we assume that those are protective for the most part, but we don't have a real good quantitative test like we have for the hepatitis B. Hepatitis B surface antibodies. I haven't seen that, and it may be just that I've missed it, but that's something that people would like to know. So, yeah, when you look at vaccines not being 100% effective, there are a variety of factors that affect them, and it could just be individual in the population.
And why herd immunity is a very big topic. I'm curious about why is herd immunity so important in controlling these vaccine preventable infectious diseases? And why do we have so much misunderstanding or misinformation around the importance of herd immunity?
Herd immunity often gets confused. You heard the statements early on when the vaccine was first coming out that we needed to reach 70% of the population to achieve herd immunity. That's higher now, of course, with the variants and Delta and Delta's effect on the incidence of cases and cross-reaction with viruses. But herd immunity basically says that the larger the percentage of the population that is immune against a disease, the greater the protection, because you have less susceptible hosts for that virus or bacteria, whatever it is, to spread in the population. And so by limiting the number of potential hosts, you therefore protect the population. How does that work? Well, if you have an unprotected population like we did before the vaccine, you have infected people with SARS-CoV-2 virus, and you have susceptible people. Well, we came in contact with each other, breathing, coughing, sneezing, whatever it is, if people weren't doing the mitigation things that they were supposed to be doing. And so you just have rampant spread of the infection. If you only have a relatively small percentage of the population that's vaccinated, you still have swaths of the population which are susceptible which can be reached by infected individuals. And so again, spreads. You need to reach a certain figure. That figure varies. It's, as I said, originally was 70%. By reaching a high percentage of the population that is immune, you not only slow down the spread of the virus to those who aren't vaccinated, but you also protect not just people who didn't want to get the vaccine, but those people who can't get the vaccine, people who are severely immune compromised, people who may have some conditions which mitigate against getting the vaccine, neurological conditions. They're going to be very hesitant to give vaccines to people who have had certain neurological conditions, Guillain-Barré, history of seizures, things like that, because your body has already shown that it can have some neurological problems, and they certainly want to prevent anything further by putting something else in the body. And there's a whole series of things to go with that. So as a result of the emergence of the variants, we look at herd immunity now being 75 to 80%. Well, last time I checked, we're at 54% in the United States, and we've only slowly been creeping up. Other countries have surpassed us. I know Great Britain and those countries in Europe started before us with the other vaccines, but I look at a country like Canada, didn't have its own vaccine, started way behind us. We had already achieved 25, 30%, and they started way behind us, and they're up over 70% now. They have really accepted vaccination and have worked to control it. It's still rampant in certain parts of the country, but we are behind. And that bothers me, because the more you allow the virus to spread between individuals, the better the chance it has to mutate to other variants, which may retard the effectiveness of the vaccine. And that's what we're dealing with now.
And I was just curious about how the new emerging microbial strains and variants can affect the success of our vaccines.
If I may go back one bit on herd immunity, by the way, and I should have mentioned earlier, there are really two ways to accomplish herd immunity. One is recovery from infection, and two is vaccination. So you can be immune. You can have a population that's relatively resistant by having them had the disease and recover, and then they develop natural active immunity, which typically is very long-standing immunity with most diseases. The problem with that is when you have recovery from infection as a major criterion for herd immunity, you can have millions of people with disease, and you can have a significant percentage, or whatever percentage it is, hospitalized and die from those diseases, from that disease. So you're really taking a risk of disease and recovery where your people's lives are going to be at risk. Vaccination, the whole idea is to lower the risk and still develop protective immunity. So early on, you heard this. People are saying, well, why don't we just let everybody get the disease and recover, and we're going to be all right. Well, yeah, but that works, but you're going to lose a lot of people as a result of dying from the disease. Millions of individuals. We don't need that. And that's not the way to go.
That blows my mind. And I actually had somebody just recently say to me, because I've been vaccinated, I've also been very cautious about mitigating any opportunity to get the disease if I were to contract COVID. But they were like, well, wouldn't you want to have it anyway now? Because now is less likely to die or have long-term side effects, and you'll get the antibodies. I was like, no, let's just be clear. I want no disease, none, just across the board. I'm real okay not having Hep B in my life, Hep C, shingle. I'm real okay not having any diseases. Please and thank you.
You're right. And also with this, with the herd immunity, and with COVID in particular, we have long COVID, and you've seen the reports and the information. There's a significant percentage of individuals now, including many younger people who have not been vaccinated, who develop these long-term symptoms greater than 4 weeks. I mean, I know colleagues and friends, and have gotten reports from other people who had manifestations of long COVID weeks to months afterwards. They're constantly tired. They can't concentrate. This brain fog that you hear about. This is something that we don't know how long that's going to occur, and we don't know what the long-term health effects of that are going to be, for example, if young children develop this, adolescents, or whatever age you want to pick. So this is where you don't want to go through the disease itself to lead to that level of population protection. But you know what? People come up with this stuff, and they don't want to get the vaccine, and they don't want to get the disease, and then they wonder where we are.
Yeah, it's so true. So going back to the emerging microbial strains and how that affects vaccine success. I mean, I think we're seeing it, right? Like we're living in the problem, it feels like, because now we have Delta and we have, what's the next one? Lambda
and Mu.
There we go. Thank you.
Well, basic microbiological principle, I guess, is that the more viruses replicate, the more they're able to spread, the better the chance for natural mutations. This happens more frequently with RNA viruses and DNA viruses, of which influenza and SARS-CoV-2 are RNA viruses in comparison to something like hepatitis B virus, which is a DNA virus. The hepatitis B vaccine has been useful and effective now for almost 40 years. You don't see that with influenza viruses because we wind up having to get a new flu shot each year because of some of the different strains that emerge. So the more that they are able to replicate and host, the greater the chance they have for mutations. Their replication cycle is not perfect. I guess that's the way to look at it. They also mutate at different rates. My understanding is that influenza mutates faster than SARS-CoV-2, but they both do. And so these mutations, when they develop, they can lead to nothing clinical. It could just be something that is with the viral structure, or they can lead to a strain or variant that is less virulent or more virulent, like the beta and now the delta variants for these. That's important. I heard a figure a while ago, and I read on it, and it was substantiated that SARS-CoV-2, since the big pandemic has begun, where people have looked at it all over the world, has had over 12,000 mutations. That's incredible. But that doesn't mean that we've had 12,000 new variants that we have to deal with. A lot of those mutations may be silent mutations that don't really affect much as far as the course of the infection. But that says how variable some of these viruses can be as they continue to move through the population. What can happen here? Well, with SARS-CoV-2, the spike protein is the major antigen. That's what you've been vaccinated against. That's what I've been vaccinated against with the Pfizer, the Moderna, and even the J&J does a little bit differently. So SARS-CoV-2 protein is the antigen that we're vaccinated against. Well, some of these mutations that we're seeing now with Delta and Beta and Alpha, they've had amino acid substitutions on that protein, and that has changed the configuration of the protein just a bit so that it may not cross-react, or the antibodies in the host that have been produced against against the vaccines don't ideally fit that spike protein on the virus to inactivate the virus. And Delta seems to be having a number of these mutations, and so it can actually escape the full impact of vaccination. Vaccinations still work. Over 98% of the hospitalization are unvaccinated, but we still are seeing some of these quote unquote breakthrough cases. And the more the virus is out there, the better the chance it has to come up with different mutations. We still don't know about Lambda or Mu. They're not variants of concern in the U.S. as yet that I know of, but they are out there and they're looking at them. So Delta is the one that we're dealing with right now. And this Delta does cause a more severe disease, certainly in unvaccinated individuals. So again, that's something you have to look at. Can it evade natural active immunity? Can it evade vaccine-induced immunity? All these studies are ongoing, and you see studies coming out every day about vaccine effectiveness. And sometimes it gets confusing because they're looking at healthcare workers, they're dealing with populations in different countries like Israel, and people get confused trying to interpret the data. And so we look to the people who really have the expertise to help us with this. And it always comes down to the same thing: get vaccinated, give yourself the best level of protection that you possibly can.
So that's interesting because I was wondering why we were seeing so many breakthrough infections. And my first thought was like, well, we're seeing so many because there are we have a bigger sample size of things happening. Everybody's getting sick. So we can see some of those vaccinated people have those breakthrough infections. But am I hearing you correctly in saying that like the mutation is just enough that it could be kind of bypassing our antibodies that we already have from the vaccine?
It may not be bypassing it, but the antibodies may not be able to inactivate all the viruses. Something like Delta, for example, which produces many times more viruses than some of the other variants, can actually overwhelm an immune. I hate to say overwhelm, but actually the immune response that you get against the vaccine may not be as effective in certain individuals with the number of viruses that are being produced, especially if that person's immune compromised. We have a lot of immune compromised individuals that have been vaccinated, thank goodness. So the viral replication, as great as it is, may actually make the immune response less effective. And that's where you have the mild cases of COVID. And you've seen and heard the data where they talk about it's possible to get a very mild case, but these are very, very, very effective against hospitalization, death, severe disease.
And is this also why we need boosters because of the variant?
There wasn't any doubt in my mind that we need boosters. People debated this, but the people I listen to, the people who I've known over the years, the people who I respect for all their work, to me, there was never any doubt about boosters. It's a respiratory virus like influenza. It's far worse than influenza, of course, but because these viruses do change, they do mutate, and we have new strains, new variants that come up over time, the boosters are going to be there needed. Plus, the immune response may not last as long. You're hearing 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, whatever it is that people are talking about for boosters. We didn't have that with hepatitis B. We didn't have that with measles, which is a more stable respiratory virus. So to me, the boosters have always been on the table. It's a matter now of, and you're hearing the controversy, do we need boosters right now? Do we need to wait a couple of months? Do we wait till immunity wanes? What's immunologic memory like? But to me, there's never been any doubt about boosters because this is not the seasonal flu. SARS-CoV-2 is not seasonal flu. It's much more serious. It's with us throughout the year versus seasonal flu that is like from October till March or something like that. Part of the problem also, just a little side note on boosters, is we're coming into flu season. So we have another respiratory virus, not nearly as infectious, but a major public health problem that we have to think about and protect ourselves against. Because if people think they have a mild cold or a mild case of the flu and it's COVID, they could be spreading it to others in their family and in their surroundings without realizing. So to me, boosters have not even been a question. They always were on the table.
I just assumed that's why I had more slots on my vaccine card.
Well, also, you mentioned the thing about the variants and boosters. I believe, I think I'm right, Pfizer, Moderna, the other manufacturers are already working on booster type injections against variants, not against the original strain like we had. And that's important because that's going to continue to modulate the vaccine's effectiveness to keep up with what is going on. And hopefully we get less and less and less of these variants so that we can have it under control. If you pin me to the wall, we're probably going to need a periodic booster against COVID. It's not going away. Hopefully we can control it. I hear people talking about flu vaccination and COVID vaccination simultaneously, and that's up to the manufacturers and the FDA to decide. But at this point, because it's so much more infectious, we need to protect ourselves, and vaccines are the best way to do it.
Yeah, I was hoping we could take some time just to chat about some vaccine reasons for vaccine hesitancy and just refusal. I mean, and if we could maybe look at COVID specifically, but because as healthcare professionals, we should have a handful of our vaccinations. So I'm just curious, like in your 50 years, maybe we could do that. Like in your years of doing this, what have you seen the reasons for the types of vaccines? And is it kind of been the same? Is it a trend that stayed the same? Or are we just getting like some real fascinating responses these days just from society?
Okay. Well, first of all, people accepted vaccines much more readily years ago. And you can say that there's more social media out there, there's more information out there, misinformation, good information, anything you want. And as I said early on, it wasn't just my responsibility for me and my family. It was to protect you and your family because we would be in contact with each other. That was always there. What happened is, for example, with dentistry, and I love telling you this. I'm very proud of dentistry. I was one of the first ones, as I said, in my part of the world to get the hepatitis B vaccine. I had to get it, and I did. But I saw that when I would be talking to these small groups and with dentists and hygienists and assistants in the very early 80s, et cetera, going around, that they responded to the hepatitis B vaccine and they got it. I worked in hospitals. Had medical colleagues, and dentistry responded, in my opinion, faster than medicine. And I'm proud of you guys for that. People were willing to accept the science. People looked at it and they analyzed it. What's happened over the years is because we've had more people and we've had much more in the way of, I'm going to say social media is the only way I can put this. Things have come out, and the more you hear them, the more people tend to believe some of this stuff about vaccines don't work or vaccines have adverse effects. A big problem was the misinformation that came out on autism with the rubella vaccines. That article in the Lancet, the author, the British author, made up the data.
Yeah, that was nuts to me.
Right. But what happened is it got out there. And by the time Lancet retracted the article in 2010, it was too late. I mean, all over the internet, you had people building on that. So that's just one aspect. People look to with all sorts of things about things that go into vaccines and improper and misinformation about these. People focus on the adverse effects and they're afraid of developing Guillain-Barré syndrome or something like this. And does it happen? Yeah. 1 in X million doses of influenza vaccine may cause Guillain-Barré, but the incidence is far, far greater with influenza. People don't think of that. I guess part of the hesitancy has come about, and we can go into the specifics if you want, is that people want absolute 100% guarantees today. And there's no 100% guarantee, period. Back in my day, sounding like a real old person now, back in my day, I had friends that had polio, who survived polio. I was in grammar school with them. They had the withered leg, they limped, etc. We had a neighbor around the block who lost a child in an iron lung to polio. So it was real. The ramifications of the disease were real. You know, as I mentioned, children around the world dying of measles. Is it common? No, but it happens often enough where it actually happens. Not in this country. And so we get the rise of these ideas, these theories, conspiracy theories, which drive me freaking crazy, by the way, about vaccines. And, you know, you try to combat it with science and good information, but it's still out there. It's still out there. If you look at the news any night, you find somebody in a hospital where they're talking about COVID and ICUs, and somebody who is severely ill who wasn't vaccinated, and the reporter will ask through the glass or something, do you wish you had gotten a vaccine? Yes, I wish I'd gotten a vaccine. But by that time, you see, the damage has been done.
And one of the things I've been seeing a lot lately is like, we don't know the long-term side effects of this vaccine. And my understanding was side effects for vaccines happen very soon, very quickly. Like when you look at years and years and years, like you're not seeing long-term side effects of a vaccination. You're seeing long-term side effects of the disease.
Correct.
Or prescription drugs. Like you might see, if you take something every single day, then you could see the long-term side effects. But from like a vaccine, like if you're going to have a reaction, that's probably going to happen fairly quickly. Am I incorrect in understanding that?
Sure. Well, the two major vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna, and even J&J to a different degree, They're messenger RNA vaccines. So it's messenger RNA. You're not injecting a live virus or an inactivated virus. You're injecting a vehicle that's going to lead to this messenger RNA antigen, which is going to lead to spike protein, which is going to stimulate immune responses. The typical vaccine side effects occur across the board with many, many vaccines. Injection site soreness, fatigue, low-grade fever, itching at the site, for a period of time, pain. And these have been looked at. There have been some excellent reports on millions of vaccine recipients showing that these are common, but they usually are very transient, a couple of hours to maybe a day or so. I have friends and relatives who, when they got the vaccine, they call me up and they say, "Oh, can you hang on?" And we talk about it, and it's over with. But the benefits of the vaccine far outweigh those transient effects. Are there rare, serious adverse effects? Possibly. Those are what we're continuing to look at as they study with the vaccine adverse reporting systems, where people can report adverse effects, and those are followed up and investigated. You saw the thing with the myocarditis with one of the vaccines and how rare that was compared to what we see in the general population incidence without vaccines. All that stuff has to be looked at. But people hear buzzwords and they jump on it. To them, and that's the reason not to get it. You and I both have heard where people, young women, are afraid to get the vaccine because it may affect their ability to have children. And multiple studies looked at people who were in clinical trials who were pregnant but didn't know it, and they followed them through. And more data now where they say pregnancy is not a contraindication for receipt of this vaccine. People still don't believe it. So, but that information is out there.
Yeah, and going back to the point that you made about autism and the data that was published that was made up, you can almost understand the hesitancy. Even just the studies and the things that were done to people of color years and years ago, you can absolutely understand the hesitancy to get something and trust that people are telling you the right thing. It just feels like we have to be very cautious of those buzzwords. We have to be very cautious of anecdotal data. And if we have multiple people giving us the same thing, then as long as it's not the fringe, the people out on the fringe telling us these things, it would be in your best interest to roll with it. It feels like.
We haven't even talked about one major reason for vaccine hesitancy that I've heard all the time, and so have you. And it came out too fast. It took 11 months. Vaccines take 7 to 10 years or longer to develop, as we have seen historically. This took 11 months. So there's obviously something not right here. Somebody's pushing an agenda. And what they need to realize is work on coronavirus vaccines started back in 2003, maybe even before, but 2003 with the original SARS outbreak, which was less than 10,000 cases and less than 1,000 deaths, not nearly as infectious as what we have now. But all of that genetic work for the new generations of vaccines was started early on. So the techniques, the knowledge, the framework, the tissue culture system, the animal system, all that stuff has been going on for almost 20 years now, certainly over 15 years. And because of the global effort of so many countries putting together their resources to develop COVID vaccines, we were able to move very, very rapidly during a time of a pandemic. This is not an epidemic. This is the worst pandemic since 1918, 1919. I mean, we have lost in this country almost 650,000 people and millions across the globe, over 4.5 million, whatever it is. And that's just reported. Those are underreported numbers. So people really were trying to do the right thing, but now other people have turned it against it, saying, see, they came out with this so fast, they want to put something into our arms that's going to track us, and all of a sudden, it's just crazy. Sometimes you just roll your eyes.
Right. And the real question should be, why do other vaccinations take so long to come out? Since we can see that when we get rid of red tape, when we have the funding, those kind of things, things move faster. And also, at least this was the thing that has sat with me for a while, and my understanding of vaccinations is that I signed up for the AZ trial. Like there were people who were like, oh my gosh, we have a problem. I will give my body to science, test this to make sure that we can all survive and get past this. And I think we had more people doing that. We had the presence of the disease. We had people out there living their lives to test to see if it was actually working, and more people volunteered.
Well, congratulations on volunteering and want to do the right thing. What we see with these varying times for different vaccines against chickenpox, measles, hepatitis B is the technology, but also these are different diseases, different organisms, and they do stimulate different levels of immune responses. You have to look at all of the different factors of the disease, not only just how it's transmitted, but the antigen characteristics, what we develop immunity against. That takes time. But with this group of viruses, we've known about coronaviruses for decades and decades and decades. Typically, the earlier coronaviruses before SARS, common colds. About 30% of the adult colds were due to coronaviruses. Nobody ever had that diagnosed. So there's a lot of science and laboratory science behind this. And that's what people need to see. But no, it happens too fast. Or I have some aversion to, I've heard enough. I don't like needles. Well, I'm sorry, you don't like needles, but that's the way to get this vaccine. And your discomfort's going to be temporary, but you're going to get some good protection out of it.
Yeah, so true. Well, just to wrap it up, I'm curious if there were any points that maybe I didn't ask about or we kind of breezed past in regards to dental healthcare providers and how important it is to have immunizations, especially when we are talking about protecting patients and protecting ourselves as we are working in healthcare.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I mentioned hepatitis B vaccine. Studies done years before and up through when the vaccine was first licensed in '82 showed that dental healthcare providers had a significant risk of hepatitis B. Wet finger dentistry, handling needles characteristically the way we do them now, all sorts of sharp instruments with probes and hand scrubbing instruments, you name it. And so hepatitis B goes. Of course, influenza vaccine has always been important. Studies done in the 80s showed that dental hygienists had the highest incidence of colds and flu of any health professional group tested in a number of hospital studies. And so, of course, masks came in. Gloves came in, of course, for the contact with hepatitis B. With this virus, because not only of droplets, but even more information now coming out on aerosol transmissions, dentistry has had to adapt to airborne precautions. The last part of those transmission precautions, contact, droplet, and airborne. And in my opinion, dentistry responded. Dental facilities, dental practices, dentist hygienist assistants, I think are doing the job. They're wearing N95 respirators or other suitable respirators. They've worked on the ventilation in the offices. They've looked at these devices that are coming out to collect aerosols or to prevent aerosols from going out into the environment. People are doing it. And again, I'm proud of what you all are doing. My concern is that as people have been doing this now for a little while, and they're getting vaccinated, to say, hey, I'm vaccinated. Do I need to do any of this anymore? Because, we've lowered the incidence of cases. And so why do I have to do this? You've already made the effort. You've already made the professional decision to do the right thing. You've invested the money in all this. Continue doing it. I tell people, and this has to go with vaccines as well as just infection control. Did you stop wearing gloves after you got the hepatitis B vaccine? Of course, the answer is no. So did you stop doing what you're doing for airborne precautions, that last transmission precaution, because now you've been vaccinated? You keep doing what you're supposed to be doing. Let the science play out on this as to what. I don't see things going back because we're going to have other airborne diseases coming out, other challenges. And so we need to be aware of them and make sure that we're doing the right things to protect ourselves, including the vaccines.
Excellent points. And I'm just really grateful for your time today. Thank you for all your expertise and coming on. I would definitely encourage, if anybody has not attended one of your courses, because you travel with your courses, correct? You're actually one of the people that are out there on the road, boots on the ground.
Well, now I'm starting to go out a little bit. It's been webinars and podcasts and now, but I get invited to some of the larger meetings, a group Concord seminars. I've been working with them, doing some seminars over the years, and they go to different cities and they have a bunch of speakers and they ask me to do some of that stuff. But no, it's my pleasure. And right now I'm still doing it.
Awesome. If anybody has any questions, how can they reach out to you?
They have my Gmail. It's my name, John Molinari, PhD @gmail.com.
That's amazing. Thank you. And please go to one of his seminars and attend OSAP meetings, especially if you are an infection control coordinator. And, we have this podcast out for Dental Infection Control Awareness Month. And I hope somebody really took a lot of this and you're able to spread the right information, or maybe you were somebody that kind of you were a little hesitant and now you're like, okay, I'm ready. So thank you, Dr. Molinari. This was great, and I appreciate all of your time.
My pleasure, Michelle. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, another great week, another great episode. We thank you all so much for listening each week. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, whatever podcasting app you're using. Also, just a reminder, our guests are so fantastic that they love when you reach out. They love when you interact with them on social media. And you can interact with us on social media as well at Instagram or Facebook. We're also on LinkedIn. You can find us at A Tale of Two Hygienists. You can also go to our website, ataleoftwohygienists.com. And we would love for you to go there and subscribe for our newsletter. We have lots of stuff on our website. We have a learning center. You can search for any episode. This is an easy place for you to find the links for our CE courses and take the test. There's just so much more there. So head over to ataleoftwohygienists.com. And if you want, you can also send us an email. I'm Michelle at ataleoftwohygienists.com. And then there's Andrew, who is Andrew at ataleoftwohygienists.com. And we just want to say thank you so much. If you love this episode and you're loving the podcast, we would love for you to subscribe and leave us a review. And, 5-star, go ahead and do it. 5-star, just hit that 5-star and then leave us a review. We really appreciate it. We love reading them. It fuels our fire. And we just appreciate you guys so much. I think that's it, Andrew. Anything else?
Nope, that's it. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, y'all.